Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new, my name's Cal, and I'm an accounting student right now, but I have a lot of different interests, like business and philosophy, tech, all sorts of things, productivity, and today I want to talk to you about some of my study techniques. Okay, so recently I did a video on how to study effectively, and it seems like it's got some good traction, so I wanted to kind of go and dive into some of my other study techniques, kind of at a more broad level, and talk about a strategy that I think you can use for every class that you're in. No matter what you're studying, whether you're in high school, college, no matter your degree, this method can apply to you, and it's gonna streamline and simplify your studying habits. We're gonna throw out a lot of those habits that maybe you've learned so far, like reading and highlighting and rereading the chapter. All of those sorts of things have actually been proven to not be effective, and we're gonna dive into a very scientifically backed and evidence-based method that you can apply to all of your studying for all your coursework. Again, I just want to highlight that this isn't going to be complicated. This is going to be super simple, and it relies on that active recall that we talked about in that last video. So if you're interested to learn more about that, just click somewhere around here for that last video that I did on active recall and effective study habits. So without wasting any time here, let's get right into it. The first step whenever I get into any coursework, any classwork, is read the materials. Now you're probably thinking, wait, Cal, you just said that we're gonna throw out that reading and rereading and all that sort of thing. But let me frame this in a different way for you. When I say read the materials, I really mean skim the chapter or skim the PowerPoint slides. Whatever the material is that they've given you, I want you to skim over it. For myself, let me give you kind of a time frame to work with. If I'm gonna read a chapter of my accounting textbook, that's gonna take me about 20, maybe 30 minutes if it's a big chapter. It's a fast skim. I'm looking for the main points, the headlines, the bolded text, just so I kind of know what I'm getting into. I wanna have a rough idea so that if someone asks me, what's chapter 5 about? I could say, oh, chapter 5 is about accounts receivable, or chapter 5 is about revenue, or anything like that. And just in case when you're going through this section, if you're tempted to spend more time than necessary on this skimming portion, you're not meant to retain the information at this point. This is merely a scouting mission. This is merely just getting out into this new land that you've never been into and try to understand what the topography looks like, what the material that you're going to learn, just what is its general shape and form. So don't stress out too much if you still feel like you have no idea what's going on. Just skim it, and once you've skimmed it, we're gonna move on to step 2. Step 2, after you've done step 1, you've done your skim, you've done your brief overview. Step 2 requires that you go back to the beginning of your materials and you're gonna start to write questions. So for the first step, we've skimmed it all, and now we're really starting to build out some of our quality study materials. So go to the beginning of the chapter or go to the beginning of the PowerPoint and start to write a question for anything that comes up. If you read a sentence that says, all dogs are blue, when you read a sentence like that with this method, I want you to write down the question, what color are dogs? And then underneath that, you would write the answer, blue. This is how I study all of my chapters, all of my PowerPoints, all the material. And if you want to use this method, I want you to make a list of however many questions are required to get through the entire chapter. So it's not uncommon for me after going through a chapter or after going through some materials to have a list maybe of 100 questions, 200 questions, even in big chapters, 300 questions. But that list of questions is a comprehensive understanding of the entire chapter of materials. It's gonna seem like a ton of questions, but when you're done, you actually have a tool that you can now use to learn the material. I will say for myself, even if it seems insignificant, I write a question about it. Because later in step 3, the next step, you're going to use these questions and you're going to use active recall to start to really hone in on the material. So even a small detail, I'm not afraid of writing a question about that. I can always throw out the question later if I deem it to not be significant. But right now, my goal is to glean all of the potential information I need to learn out of this chapter, because I don't want to have to go back and reread the chapter like we were talking about before. Ideally, this might be my last time looking at this chapter. I'm building a set of tools that are going to allow me to study all of this material super efficiently. Ultimately, the goal of writing these questions is to help you get better and better at knowing the material. You're going to use active recall to ask yourself these questions and force yourself to come up with those answers. Over time, you're going to get better and better at answering these questions until you have completely mastered all of the content. So don't worry about the overall length of the questions. In fact, the more questions you have, it's a good indication that you're really capturing all of the material. Okay, we've knocked out step 1 and step 2. This is a super simple process. And now we're on to step 3. In step 3, you're gonna start your review. So you have that that list of questions that you've written down, and now you're gonna start going through your questions. If you're going through your list of questions for the first time and it seems daunting, this is completely normal. I would say that for me, when I go through my questions the first time, I don't know anything. I maybe am getting 20 or 30% of the questions, especially if this is a brand new chapter. If I've never been around this kind of material before, there'd be no reason that I know any of this material. But I promise you, you just need to get started. As you get your feet wet, you're gonna become more and more used to these questions. You're gonna become used to the answers. And as you start to study over that 7 or 10 or 14-day period prior to your exam, you're gonna become far more familiar with this content. And if you just stick with it, I promise you, it's all gonna come together. If you are getting questions wrong, I want you to reframe it and think of it like this. By getting questions wrong, you actually know where you need to focus. If you were getting all of the questions right, in a way that wouldn't be helpful at all, because then you wouldn't know where the gaps are in your knowledge. So when you get questions wrong, it's actually helpful to you, even though I know it can be frustrating. I was reading a thread on Reddit recently, and one of the people on there were saying that they actually set a goal for the number of questions they can get wrong in their study sessions. So until they get, I think for them it was like 40 questions wrong, they can't stop studying. I really like that perspective because in a way, the whole point of studying is to get questions wrong so that you know what direction you need to head in order to further prepare yourself. So maybe that will help you. You can kind of reframe it. Say, I need to get 10 questions wrong or 20 questions wrong, or if it's a bigger session, 40 or 50 questions wrong. And then I can know for my next session where I'm really gonna hone in. So those are the main 3 steps to the study process, period. First you skim, then you write your questions, and then you're gonna review. But I wanna add a few more details here that may help some of you in really setting yourself up for success. In order to use this process effectively, I really suggest sticking to a schedule. And this is gonna be different for everyone, depending on your schedule, depending on how busy you are, and how much studying you're able to do. But I would start to look at your schedule in 7 or 10 or 14-day periods of time prior to an exam. And I would aim to have most of my study materials all put together by that 7-day mark or that 10-day mark or 14-day mark out from an exam. From there, I would start breaking this down kind of day by day. So let's work with 10 days. On the first day, I would hope to have all of my study materials done. I've reviewed the chapter, I've skimmed the chapter, I've made my questions, and I am now ready to review. On that first day, it's gonna feel like I know nothing. I'm maybe only getting 30% of my questions right. And it might be a very somewhat frustrating study day. But you're prepared for this. That's your expectation. You know that you're just getting your feet wet. On the first day, I might suggest that you study twice. Do 2 review sessions. Do an hour or 2 in the morning and then do an hour or 2 at night. Get yourself around the material because in the beginning, you're gonna need some more frequent touch points with this material as you're building your knowledge. So on the first day, if your schedule allows, maybe do 2 sessions. And then the next morning, I would knock out another session. Depending on how you're feeling, maybe you do another one in the evening. And remember, these sessions just revolve around going through your questions. You're just asking yourself the question, and then you're trying to recall the answer. That's it. So hopefully these sessions aren't too daunting because you don't have to go back into the chapter material. You already know what you're trying to learn. Part of this strategy is going to require you to self-regulate the amount of studying you do as you get closer and closer to your exam date. If you're starting to feel pretty good, I would say that you could study one day, skip the next day, and then come back to it on the following day. You start to allow yourself these larger gaps in between your study session as your retention is building. I would also suggest that you're identifying areas as you're going through your list of questions that you need to work more on. Just add a little dot or a little check mark next to it on questions that you really need to focus on when you come back for your next session. You should adapt your schedule to the different variables in your own life, between your work schedule, your school schedule, your other commitments. But in general, I would get more frequent touch points up front. And then the questions that you're feeling quite good on, I would lay those aside. And then I would hone in more on the questions that are not going so well, the ones that you're struggling to answer easily or quickly. I would add a final brief addendum here, or maybe a 5th step, depending on what you're studying. Some subjects are so big that there are multiple subjects beneath one subject. For instance, in accounting, we're taught both a multi-step income statement and a single-step income statement. And so you would want to break those potentially into 2 different groups. And I know this applies particularly in like medicine or other areas as well, where there are a lot of different areas or topics you're going to need to tackle under one test or one exam. So consider breaking your questions up into groups so that you can kind of identify that, oh, I'm feeling very good on the single step, and I'm not feeling so good on the multi-step. By breaking your subject matter up into groups, it's gonna help you understand when one area is pretty good and you can shift your focus maybe almost entirely to a new area, and then after a few days, just do a quick run through of the area that you're already feeling really confident about. That's gonna help you be way more efficient in this entire process. So hopefully after this video, you're feeling a little more confident with your studying. I hope this framework is something that you could apply to all your classes. Really for me, relying on those questions completely changed how I went about studying. Previously, I was that person who was rereading and rereading and rereading the chapter, getting out my highlighters, and trying to retain the information. And I was always confused when I got to the exams why, even though I spent hours preparing for this exam in good faith, I would be blindsided by some of the questions. And that's not to say that this method is going to make every exam perfect, but I think it removes a lot of the wasted time that I was putting into my study efforts. So hopefully you find something similar with this. If you have suggestions or ways that you find to be very effective when you're studying, drop a comment below, let me know what you think. And if you find great success with this method, also let me know. I'd love to hear about it. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.